You've come to the right spot. It's another edition of Lewis at Large. 60 minutes of smart talk radio is in your future, with guests from all walks of life and all points of view. And now, with this week's edition of Lewis at Large, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and this segment no exception. Excited to have a bright guy with us. His name is Paul Nourigat. He's got a brand new workout called No Time to Wander. The financial compass for young Americans. But just as importantly, he also can talk to adults, and as well, that's a good thing. Who is Paul Nourigat? He's a leading national consultant and senior wealth strategist for U.S. Bank as his day job, but he's also consulted with thousands of companies and families regarding their financial management and related matters. He is very passionate about the subject of educating our youth with tools to provide them with a more positive financial future. And he works across the country and around the world on that subject. Paul, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Appreciate being with you this morning, Warren. Thank you.
You bet. We are happy to have you. Let's start here. Give us a little bit, give us some of our Lewis at Large listeners a little bit more bio information about you regarding you work with U.S. Bank, a large national bank, but tell us a little bit specifically about your background and why is the financial wherewithal of our youth so important to you?
Well, thank you. So I kind of consider myself a very normal guy who has a family. I've been married for 30 years, and I grew up in a less than elaborate environment. I kind of came up the hard way. I had a roof over my head. I had a clothes on my back, and I feel very fortunate for that. But the truth is, I saw my folks struggle with money, and I saw them and their lives challenged because of that. And then as a financial advisor and someone who has consulted with businesses and families for 30 years, I kept coming across points of pain and difficulties. And in 2008, 2009, when the sort of the sky fell, and I really was hitting my head against the wall because so much of the pain and difficulty was unnecessary. But people had made bad decisions, and not just because they were greedy, but because they lacked the competencies to do the fundamental things that would have made a big difference in our country's history and their own happiness and spared them from a lot of anxiety. So that really bothered me, and I realized I couldn't get to as many people as I wanted to one-on-one consulting. And through the bank, I'm very fortunate to work with many people around the country on these topics, but I wanted to have a broader reach. And so the bank has allowed me in my off time to write 9 books over the last 4 years. And I'm just releasing my most current one, which is a nonfiction for young adults. And so if I may, Warner, I just want to make this point that my first 8 books for kids, teens, and younger. This book is for those young people who are getting out of college, and they're moving out, and they're trying to be independent. They're in their 20s, sometimes their 30s, and they just don't know how the real world works, and they're going to face those same problems generations before them faced. I'm trying to give them a roadmap and help them avoid some of the pitfalls.
Right. Let's use that. Let's explore. I'd like to explore that for just a minute. There's some economy here. There's some sociology here. There are those that would say, and you're talking primarily children of baby boomers. There are those that are going to say that's an indictment of the baby boom generation that would, quote, allow their kids to move back home and basically be sort of recoddled again, and not kind of kicking them out on their ear and saying, go get a job like the rest of we've all done in history. That sounds a little harsh, but I'm curious as to your take on that. Do you agree that maybe this generation that you're talking about may not feel as independent as those that came before it?
Maybe, but the generation before it, the baby boomers, including me, we grew up in one of the greatest economic expansions in the world history.
Right.
We had the promise, and great promise, and constant promise, and constantly improving lifestyles. And so we were the benefactors of that. And it's our generation that did, in fact, put our kids in front of TV sets and allowed them untethered internet. And so I'm not one to indict anybody, though. I want you to know that. I'm one of those guys that I like to look at the way things are. And it's good to understand why they got where they are. But I also know that it's an incredibly diverse world, and amongst your listeners right now, there are folks at various ends of the wealth spectrum with varying family backgrounds, varying religions, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm not one to sort of single any one thing out. Here's what I know. We've got millions and millions of young Americans right now that are feeling a great sense of despair. They don't know where to go. They can't find jobs. And the reality is that if it helps a young person to bring them back in your home and help give them a place to land while they get their feet on the ground, good for you. I think that's a great thing, and it's actually reconnecting families that have been overly mobile throughout our recent history. So at the same time, I'm a tough love guy, and there's a time when you got to step up, and there's a fine balance there, and I think that's the important message in my book, and frankly in everything I do, is I encourage balance versus sensationalism on these topics.
I don't want to, again, get into a debate of who's responsible for the success of young people, parents or schools, but let's do take a look, Paul, from where you sit at the public school system in particular. How well-versed or how well educated on the ways of the world, so to speak, do kids these days? What kind of education do they get from the public schools?
So the public schools have been misorienting, or I should say directing education in ways that is not as constructive. And yet I also think that they're making progress. But boy, we got a 25% high school lack of graduation, only a 75% graduation rate. So we have a lot of things that are challenges there. But we've also got a demographic profile, crumbling parental support structures, crumbling budget structures that are putting that educational system that has been too static for too long in a very difficult position. That said, the educational establishment at a national level has woven financial literacy, for example, into what's called the core, the Common Core. And the Common Core is getting a lot of press these days, and I don't want to bore your listeners with the details of that, but the objective is to try to create these standards that make sense, that can then be applied appropriately within each state. But financial literacy is an example of that. It's a modification to the core educational standards, and I think I'd rather have my kid know how to balance a checkbook than candidly be able to do trigonometry.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So when I wrote my books, every one of them, I had met with teachers and community leaders to build on what I thought I knew. And because of that, I designed every one of my books around the new Common Core, so that when a teacher uses that book in a classroom or a parent reads that book with a kid, they're learning their reading skills, they're learning their sociology skills, they're learning their financial and math skills all in one reading, because we need efficiency in the educational system.
What, because you work with a lot of young people, what are you finding when you talk to them? Are they, wow, this is exciting, I wish someone would have told me this, or are you just another adult talking head talking to them?
So I think that people reach a point where they're ready to listen. You know, the old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will come. So my first 8 books are nonfiction. They're stories. They're graphically rich, because those younger folks need to be engaged in a different way. For my most recent book, a nonfiction, 240-page for 20-somethings, there's nothing cute there. It's in your face. It's straight up, because I think they're ready for straight talk. And if they're not ready for my book. If they want to move forward, when they finally make that decision that life is tough, and they need to step up, and they need to have disciplines, and they need to have a plan. Okay, they need to have a plan. That's when they're ready for this book. And candidly, I just got a note from a 70-year-old, and he had just read the book. He says he's buying it for everybody in his family, and he says, Paul, this is not just for 20 and 30-somethings. Well, the way I wrote it is for them because I want to speak to them on their terms. But the bottom line is that people come along at different times, and we need different mediums. We need parents, we need educators, and we need guys like me creating this stuff. We need your show, Warren, to just bring the messages to folks, and so when the stars are in alignment, they're able to capitalize on that, and again, avoid some of the pitfalls with potholes in the road.
All right, let's and again, we're talking to Paul Nourigat, and he is the. Well, we're talking specifically today about No Time to Wander, a brand new work he has out. It's his 9th work, The Financial Compass for Young Americans. He is a strategist and a senior wealth strategist for U.S. Bank, but he is also a prolific author on the economy, financial success, particularly for young people. Paul, I am going to graduate in May of 2014. I'm going to graduate with a degree in communications, all right? And I had an internship with a newspaper, and I worked for a little social media company, and it's now May the 15th. What should I do? When should I start applying for jobs? What should I start looking for, et cetera, et cetera? And how should I prepare myself?
Well, I think there's multiple things there, so let's kind of walk through it briefly. If you want to drill down on it, we can drill down on it. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start considering my past. I'm going to build a wonderful resume, but I'm going to think back about what I've done in my life, and I'm going to try to get those experiences out on paper and in a place where I can demonstrate to my employers what I have achieved and what I have learned. And so building that resume and getting out and starting to talk to folks way ahead of needing a job. I wouldn't be afraid to tap my family and say, who do you know? Who can I meet with? I want to start cutting my teeth on the interview process. I don't want to show up on game day not having practiced. So I think that's just a great way to go. And I have a son, coincidentally, Warren. He's graduating in communications. He's graduating in 8 months. And he is doing things, and he's done things for me. In fact, he researched a good piece of the book that we're talking about today because I wanted to give him that opportunity, and he was willing to step up and do some tough work. So first message is position yourself, profile yourself, build your brand, figure out what you want to do, your range of possibilities, and then don't be afraid to get out there and explore. Don't worry about being perfect. Get out there, shake hands, meet people, tell them your story, understand and learn some things about the process just through osmosis. You're going to learn a lot. And that's, I think, step one. Step two is when you get that work, when you get that job, you have a budget put together. You have a cash flow budget. I make a big point of that in this book. There's a chapter dedicated to how to manage your cash flow. And you establish a discipline around cash flow and try to avoid the things that you just don't need. And you start putting money away immediately into a retirement account in your first year out of college. I know that sounds crazy. That's what I did. That's why I was able to retire at a very young age.
Paul, real just specifically on that thing of putting money away, young people may think, well, yeah, he's talking about putting a few hundreds or thousands away. I've only got $8 left over every paycheck at the most. What's put money away? Any amount?
Thank you. It really is any amount because, again, I respect the diversity of our listeners here today and the families that are coming in. They're in different situations. We've got folks that are struggling, and they've got nothing right now. Okay, they can't rub two nickels together. And then we got folks that are kind of breaking through, and I'm talking for folks that are breaking through. For those folks that are struggling, I get it, and you got to pay the bills, you got to pay the groceries, but you got to cut out non-essentials, the things that you don't need. Cut it out, get rid of it until you're able to save money and build a rhythm. For those folks that I would suggest are more the norm of your listener, and they are people that are going to start breaking through in a career, they're going to start making it. At that point, to be able to save a couple $1,000 a year, for example, in an IRA or a Roth IRA or your company's savings plan, if you're fortunate enough to work for an employer who has a 401k, for example, or a state government that has a pension plan. These are the things that are critical to start day one. I started that the first year out of college, and that has grown very nicely since.
Paul, again, what... Okay, that's your advice. Now let's talk to the parents. What can they do to be supportive and make sure or do the best they can to support their child, at least through this early period?
Okay, so the number one thing is you set a good example yourself. If you're capable of setting a good example yourself, that's always what's going to be the best lesson. But then, as these kids, maybe and older folks, they're beyond. They've already seen what they've seen. They are who they are. Encouraging during these tough times and during these formative years are really important. As we're talking to 20-somethings now, being supportive and being encouraging is, I think, really important. It might be, again, that you can introduce them to folks who you know that can offer perspective beyond the parents' words. Sometimes that's very healthy. And beyond that, you know what? That kid's got to step up. The kid's got to step up. There's that tough love factor. And I'm capable of giving my children more, but they're not going to get more because I will do them harm if I coddle them farther in life. They need to step up on their own. They will find things about themselves through the difficulties that they'd have never found if I'd have ushered them through life.
Another, fair or not, another observation of this younger generation, and by younger meaning those that have been graduating the last couple of years and those to come, is the word entitlement may not be fair, but that they may have too high of an expectation from their employer or their first job. Can you weigh in on that a little bit?
Yes, I think that there's a lack of experience, and because of that, a lack of humility, but also just awareness. And sometimes entitlement is this very broad brush thing because, again, these kids grew up in an expansion world. But the reality is our 20-somethings lived through two of the worst economic collapses in our lifetimes. So, and again, we're the parents that put them in front of TVs and gave them the toys. So I'm kind of not into pointing fingers and calling them entitled, but I would say that generally they lack experience. I had 12 jobs by the time I finished college. Okay? 12 jobs. I mean, I loaded trucks when I was 17, and I worked in a pipe factory when I was 14, and I worked in a graveyard shift as a janitor when I was in college. And I'm a little embarrassed at, that kind of stuff as I look back, but it was formative for me, and through those jobs, including ones that I wasn't great at, I learned a lot. Many of our younger generation haven't had that opportunity. So I think the important message is for employers and parents is to bring these young people along. And to the young people, it's to humble yourself. It's to have big open ears. It's to hustle. There's a chapter in my book called Protecting Work, a significant chapter on how to find a job, state-of-the-art of how to find a job, and a chapter dedicated to protecting your job because those principles are counterintuitive to what our young people know.
Paul, what about the whole idea of setting up a budget? And I know you can't go into a lot of detail here in this format on the radio, but tell us overall how prepared do you think younger people are, and give us a couple of tips there on setting up just a basic budget.
Yeah, very happy to. So, and I think there is a really simple way, which I think is a cool message. One of the things about budgeting for most people, but in particular young people, is it just sounds complicated, and it's a kind of nitpicky when they just want to have fun and kind of roll with the punches. But the reality is what the budget does is you figure out up top what's coming in the door, okay? You estimate conservatively what is coming in the door, what kind of income you can expect. We'll call that the top line. And then you've got your costs. You've got known costs that you're going to list next. You're going to subtract those from your income up above. And it's rent, for example, and you've got an approximate cost for gas each month, et cetera, et cetera. Then you've got, those are the known expenses, and those are the things that you can't necessarily control. So those are non-discretionary. Then you have discretionary expenses. Those are the things that maybe I don't have the best cell phone plan, or maybe I don't have the nicest cable package. Those are choices that I make when I have the luxury to make those choices. In the end, I get my stuff up top, I subtract my expenses, I subtract my discretionary expenses, and I've got a little bit left over each month. But up in that expense category, along with rent, should be my savings. How much do I want to save each month? And I just got to do it. So the budget is really a plus, minus exercise. I have a chapter in the book dedicated to budgeting. I have an online tool that is referenced in the book that people can go to actually see the budget and play with it. And in the end, it's a reference point that keeps you from spending money that you just don't have. But it keeps you out of the heat of battle when we're faced with advertisements and we want to go buy that $3 latte. It might just not be in the cards right now.
Well, yeah, the 89-cent convenience store version might be a little bit better choice.
Very good.
What about, Paul, let's talk about this subject of credit. I don't know many young people that don't have some kind of a credit card, be it their parents or their own. Speak to that a little bit.
You bet. So I want you to know I'm okay with a loan, for example, loans and credit. But with credit cards, I don't want to get in debt with a variable rate interest rate that gets me in trouble. I don't want to buy things that I can't afford today. And so credit cards I use for convenience. I want you to know I have a credit card, and I'm very high on a credit card, but I don't want to get in debt. I don't want to fall behind. So my wife and our principle is that we pay off our credit card every month, and we pay it off completely. We do not want to go in debt. One exception would be a mortgage for our home. Sometimes a loan for a car. If that gets you to work and it gets you there in a reliable way, and it's the only way you're going to get a car right now that's a good car, then I respect that, and I think there are certain loans that make great sense. But consumer credit is the absolute death knell for a great financial future.
Well, we could go on and on here. Would like to. We've been talking to Paul Nourigat. He is a financial advisor and wealth management advisor for U.S. Bank. He's also a prolific author. This is his 9th work called No Time to Wander, The Financial Compass for Young Americans. And it is a interesting guideline and blueprint for all things financial for them. Paul, again, as we kind of close out here, let's just sort of the tops of the trees. If there's one word of advice or one sort of true north message out of the book, what would that be?
Plan with discipline.
That's pretty heady. The work is published by Far Beyond Publishing. Paul, how can people find out more, and any kind of a website, or who can they contact to get some more information and maybe a copy of the book?
You're very kind. You could search on Amazon, but for my name. But that's maybe it's easier to just go to farbeyond.com. That's FARBEYOND. Farbeyond.com. All of my works are there with links to Amazon.
Hey, listen, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and to all of us that are parents of younger people, pay heed here. This could have a tremendous material difference on the financial future of your child. So, Paul, again, have a great 2014. Would love to talk to you again.
You're very kind, and I look forward to it.
You bet. We'll be back with more on Lewis at Large right after this.